Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the new Ascendancies. This is going to be a deep dive into the Amazon Ascendancy. The Amazon is going to be one of the two Huntress-themed Ascendancies. It seems like you'll have a little bit of a moral choice that you can make. The option of going as a ritualist if you feel like being a little bit more into dark sacrifice, or alternately, you can ascend as an Amazon if that's not your thing. Also, the Amazon looks like it's got a number of really cool things going for it. Of course, being a new class is always going to be exciting, but I wanted to break down some of the things that may be a little bit less obvious about this particular Ascendancy. Let's take a look at Grinding Gear Games' teaser of what this Ascendancy is going to provide. And let's just start by clarifying Mystic Harvest first. This is one of the 2-point nodes that you can pick up, and this is the life leech oriented one. Now this is one of the sections that does not gate anything else beyond it, so it's just a 2-pointer. It doesn't unlock the option of taking a 4-pointer that's behind it. That's what we're going to start with, the 3 2-point options that we've got. Now, the text on this, life leech recovers based on your elemental damage as well as physical damage. So what this means is that your elemental damage gains the capacity to leech. This doesn't cause it to leech on its own. You need to get that capacity from somewhere else. But ordinarily, you can only gain this effect with physical damage. This is giving you an option to use weapons that might convert your damage into elements, or to use skills that convert your damage into elements, but still get the benefits of life leech if you have it on your character. This is one of those things that I feel we're really going to need to play around with once we know more about the itemization available for the Amazon. So I wanted to cover this one quickly, partly because I wanted to move my face to cover it, but also because it's the one that we really have the least information about how good it's going to be. There's one of those effects that could be quite good. It could even be so good that it feels necessary, but it's also something that does absolutely nothing if your build is dealing exclusively physical damage. And while we're looking at the 2-point defensive nodes, we also have the option of Azmeri Brew. This essentially makes both your life flasks and your mana flasks into rejuvenation flasks, flasks that recover both resources for you. This is going to be one of those things that I think will feel incredibly good throughout the campaign, but once your character gets stronger, this is going to fall off in potency tremendously. This is definitely the sort of thing you should consider taking early, especially if you want to take a 4-pointer that's really good, but the 2-pointer leading up to it is not so good. And we'll come to that when we look at Critical Strike and Penetrate, which are the straight numbers things that would be used on a physical damage dealing Amazon. They're really, really good, at least once you've got all 4 points there, but the first one is perhaps not quite so impressive. I consider Azmeri Brew to be something for earlier in the game. Later on, you'll definitely have enough uses of your life and mana flask charges in most situations. One other thing I think really needs to be said though about Azmeri Brew, this is a not so obvious downside to this, and that is life flasks also recover mana. Okay, so this means that when you tap your life flask, you start also regenerating mana as well. But what happens if your life becomes full? Well, at that point, your life flask ends, and therefore your mana recovery ends immediately as well. So that's an important thing to keep in mind with Azmeri Brew. All in all, Azmeri Brew, I consider it mostly a leveling thing. Okay, so the third of the 2-pointers that you've got here is Stalking Panther. Stalking Panther is an interesting one. Evasion rating from your equipped helmet, gloves, and boots is doubled, but evasion rating that's sourced from your equipped body armor is halved. At this point, we need to take a quick break. We need to talk about the formula for evasion rating in Path of Exile 2. So you can think of this as your chance to evade, or you can think of it as the attacker's chance to hit. This will just end up being a case of 1 minus or just the fraction instead. But if we think of it as a chance to evade, 1 minus attacker's accuracy times 1.5 over attacker's accuracy plus defender's evasion. This is your probability to successfully evade. What does it mean in this situation to double your evasion rating? So because this formula is not something that's trivial to see exactly how it works, what I've done is I've just created a spreadsheet that has a ratio between the monster's accuracy and your evasion rating. So this is your evasion rating divided by the monster's accuracy. Now, the higher that this ratio gets, the more swings on average it's going to be required for the monster to land one hit on you. So for instance, you can see that if your evasion rating is 1.25 times the monster's accuracy, then on average the monster's going to take 1.5 swings to hit you. If you can improve this ratio to 2, then the number of swings required to hit you is going to jump up to 2. If you can improve this further to 3.5, which is a big jump up in the amount of evasion rating you've got, then your survivability will also go up as well. You're going to take 3 swings on average to hit instead of 2. And this is going to continue to improve. You never quite double your effective hit points by doubling the amount of evasion rating that you've got on your character, but it does sort of get close to that. That's the limiting case, until we hit a point where your evasion is about 30 times as high as the monster's accuracy, and at this point you hit a hard cap. There is a 5% minimum chance for enemies to hit you, and so that ends up being the end of evasion rating getting any better. Anyways, all of this numbers aside, what is this formula, what does this all mean for you if you allocate the Stalking Panther notable? This is not going to double your chance of survivability, but it's not all that far off it, as long as you are willing to use a body armor that is not providing much evasion rating. Most of the time, this is not going to be suitable for you at all. This is essentially a notable that is an extremely good survivability node, if and only if your Amazon is electing to use a chest piece that provides absolutely no evasion or a trivial amount of evasion. In this situation, it may almost double the amount of evasion rating your character's got, and therefore provide almost a 100% increase in the amount of effective hit points you've got against various types of hits. Also important to note, there is no defense provided by evasion rating against any sort of damage over time that doesn't hit, and so you're going to have some sort of defense against that as well. But Stalking Panther, allocate this if and only if you're using a unique chess piece that is providing you a lot of other benefits, but that provides only a negligible or no evasion rating to your character. So that's all of the defensive 2-pointers out of the way. After this, we have 3 different types of offense that the Amazon can spec into. I think there'll be players that elect to go for 2 of the defensive 2-pointers and also elect to take 1 of these 4-point branches. And I also think there'll be players that mix up 2 of these branches and eschew defense entirely, picking it up on the classic passive tree, picking it up on gear. And of course, you can mix and match a little bit, especially if you're in a situation where one of the 2-pointers is better for you than the 4-pointer behind it. I think that may well be the case for Elemental Infusion in some situations. Let's start by looking at the most exciting of these branches. This is the one that culminates in Penetrate. So Penetrate has the text, attacks using your weapons have added physical damage equal to 25% of the accuracy rating on the weapon. What does this mean? This is not your character's entire amount of accuracy, so this is not going to include bonuses to your accuracy that come from your character. This is not going to include bonuses to your accuracy that come from other sources. However, it's still really, really good. And that's because the numbers that can roll on one-handed weapons for accuracy are actually really high in Path of Exile 2. Now, a little bit of a mistake was made when the game was brand new. And that mistake was that some spears were allowed to drop from the Trial Master specifically. It was only unique spears, but this provided enough information for data mining to take place on spears, and we have a fairly good look at what the mod pool is likely to be once patch 0.2.0 goes live. We don't know the relative rarity of these mods, but this is something that's actually reasonably well known for other weapon types. For instance, there's a website, craftofexile.com. This is their estimates, their best estimates as to the rarity of various mods that can spawn on one-handed maces, the most similar weapon type to one-handed spears. Now, you'll be able to see here that the highest tier accuracy mods have a weighting of 300. What this means is they're pretty rare. There's not going to be something you see all that often, but it's about 1 in 200 prefixes that generates will be either the Dictator's prefix or the Amazon's prefix. Now, this is their best estimate, and it might not be exactly right. You can have a look at the website if you want to read their methodology, but it seems like it's fairly solid, especially for mods that aren't particularly desired at the moment, such as the Amazon's mod, the one that provides a huge gob of flat accuracy. Anyway, the numbers that are speculated to exist for spears are Amazon's 451 to 550 accuracy rating, Dictators, which can go as high as 200, and a much smaller amount, but the Light Radius mod can go as high as 60. You are looking at a spectacularly well-rolled spear having 800 accuracy, but more realistically, you're looking at something in the 550 to 620 range, being much more accessible than that. So let's assume that you've got 600 on your endgame spear. Well, that is going to add 150 flat physical damage to your attacks. Now, to take some comparisons from the way things have worked in the past, we don't have anything with this exact text in Path of Exile 1 or 2, but generally speaking, this would not be something that would scale with effects like the Merciless or Tyrannical or Cruel or Bloodthirsty mods that provide an increase to the local physical damage on the weapon. This would instead be something that is a property of your character and therefore wouldn't be scaled in that way. And if GGG have made an exception here, this is going to be ridiculously powerful. All that said, Penetrate just gives so much flat physical damage that if you can get the right spear, one that's rolled with a lot of accuracy on it, and potentially with other desirable mods, you definitely want attack speed. Other things are more luxury mods. But if you can get something that's fantastic, Penetrate is going to be one of the best 4-pointers in the entire game. And that's a good thing too, because it is behind a 2-pointer, Critical Strike, that sounds absolutely spectacular until you take another look at the nuances of that evasion and accuracy formula. Now, it's worth noting that this is another example of unprecedented wording. This does not exactly match anything else in the game, either Path of Exile 1 or Path of Exile 2, and as a result, there's 3 possible interpretations that this could mean. Firstly, gain additional critical hit chance equal to 25% of excess chance to hit with attacks. This could be base critical, as though your weapon had that much higher base crit on it. If that's the case, this is a reasonable but unspectacular node, and it still ends up as a tax node. The other 2 possible ways that it could be interpreted are much worse. The first one is that it's a flat increase. So if your chance to critically strike is 60% and your chance to hit is 128%, then your critical strike chance goes from 60 to 67%. In this situation, this is a blatant tax node. It's doing very little for you. It's not that it's doing nothing, it's just that it's close enough to nothing that it's going to feel bad. And then the third possibility is that this ends up being increased critical hit chance, and that's going to be even worse again. So 3 possible interpretations. If it's base critical strike chance, then this is a reasonable 2-point node. If it ends up that it's a flat critical strike chance increase though, this is a tax node that you don't want to take itself, but the 2 points behind it are so good that you end up taking it anyway. Now, let's dig into that accuracy formula so that you can see why 128% is realistic, but you're not going to be getting 600% chance to hit, nor are you even going to get the theoretical maximum of 150% chance to hit. Problem: what happens in this accuracy formula if the monster's evasion rating is 0, or if your accuracy goes to infinity? Well, your chance to hit goes to 150%. That's it. And so even in that perfect scenario where the monster has exactly 0 evasion rating, or you have exactly infinite accuracy, in that situation, all you're going to gain here is 12.5% chance to crit. Nothing to sneeze at, but also nothing particularly remarkable either. So what we've got here is a 2-pointer node that is essentially a tax. You take critical strike not because it's worth 2 ascendancy points, but because Penetrate, which is behind it, is worth 4, maybe even more than 4. And as a result, you're forced to take this node that doesn't feel very good when you pick it up. You also have 2 small nodes here that are 12% increased accuracy rating. I think the Amazon is going to be in a situation where they're pretty much always hitting when they're attacking, and they're only going to get a small amount of benefit out of this critical strike node here. So from the physical cluster to the elemental cluster, which is the top one of these lines here, we have elemental infusion and infused avatar. And here, Granny Gear Games have been polite enough to provide us with the text of elemental infusion as well. Infused weapon is a skill that is going to grant your weapon infusion, which is a buff, projectile attacks with that weapon. So note that this only applies to projectile attacks with that weapon, not to the times that you use your spear in melee. They're going to consume an infusion to infuse the next projectile fired, causing it to explode at the end of its flight. And then you can have that cold infused, you can have it fire infused, you can have it lightning infused. And there's different ways that this is going to work, and that's going to depend upon how exactly you trigger elemental infusion. When you consume a power charge, this is going to trigger infused weapon, and it's going to grant you 2 cold infusion. So you're then going to have 2 uses of this ability that's going to cause your damage to be converted to cold, and is also going to cause a cold explosion at the end of it. There is also going to be an equivalent for fire and also for lightning. So the fire ones come from the endurance charges, and the lightning infusion comes from the frenzy charges. They might work slightly differently to each other. We only have the exact text of how the cold infused version works, but hopefully that's something we'll get full information on. I do think they're going to go for the same power level for the 3 different infusions, and really it's going to come down to what sources of power charges, endurance charges, or frenzy charges you have on your character. You're then going to want to be using these in order to power the elemental infusion and fire off some really, really dangerous projectiles. This is likely to be at its best in the in and out playstyle, the agile melee playstyle that the Huntress appears to be specialized in, where you dart in, you strike enemies in melee, and before they can counterattack, you zip back out and you release a deadly spear barrage. Now, this can be made better by investing 2 more points into infused avatar. Here you will gain a 50% chance for infusion to not be consumed when you infuse a projectile. So essentially, this is going to give you double the ability to use elemental infusion. But it's worth noting that because this is probabilistic and not deterministic, you're not guaranteed to get 4 uses every time that you spend a charge. Quite often, you'll find that you'll only get 2 uses, and then other times you'll get 6 or even 7. That's going to be something that you'll need to adapt to, and that can be something that's quite tricky to do while you're playing the game. So the more attentive you are, the better infused avatar is going to be. But if you prefer a more chill and relaxed playstyle, elemental infusion is going to be the important thing from this cluster. And then after that, you can consider investing in something else. Maybe you're going to go with Penetrate, Elemental Infusion, and then whichever of the 3 defensive options you've got ends up working best for you. And then finishing everything off, we have the middle cluster. I've saved this one for last, not because it's the most exciting, not because it's the least exciting, but because it's the one that we have the least experience with. We don't know all of the details of exactly how this is going to work. Predatory Instinct. Reveal weaknesses against rare and unique enemies. This is going to be something that's going to allow you to reveal weaknesses against them, and if you're successful in doing so, you'll get 50% more damage against enemies with an open weakness. And then In for the Kill is going to make this mechanic even better. 20% increased movement speed when an enemy with open weakness is within 6 meters of you, and 40% increased skill speed when an enemy with an open weakness is in your presence. So as long as one of your nemesis is alive and close to you, you're going to feel like an absolute god. The thing is that there's a couple of things we're not sure about. Most critically, what percentage of a monster's life will these weaknesses be active for? If it's 30% of a monster's life, this is pretty marginal. If it's 70% of a monster's life, this is going to be fantastic. And if it's somewhere in between, well, this is going to be somewhere in between. I think this is going to be one of those things we're going to have to test out in practice, gather some data on just how often those weaknesses are active, and then we'll be able to truly assess this. That said, there's plenty of good stuff in the Amazon Ascendancy, so if it turns out that these are dumpster tier, then it's not some big problem. You can just unspec them for a few gold, and then pick up something else that's proven to be strong. My first intuition about how to build an Amazon at the moment is going to be to take the Penetrate cluster and change the gear that you're looking for on your spears accordingly. So you're going to definitely want to be looking for these high accuracy ratings, whether it be the Dictator's family, the Amazon's family. Don't worry so much about the light radius. That's much more of a luxury. Then once you've got that all settled, after that, you probably want to either look at taking 2 of these defensive clusters or just see how it feels to use Elemental Infusion. If you are generating a lot of power charges, endurance charges, or frenzy charges, you don't need to be generating all of them, you just need to be generating some, then in that situation, Elemental Infusion may end up feeling amazing. And if Elemental Infusion feels good, then you can consider doubling down on it and taking Infused Avatar. But if you do that, you're going to miss out on the benefits of things like Mystic Harvest, the probably fairly weak Azmeri Brew, and Stalking Panther if you happen to be using a chess piece that perfectly suits it. But whatever you do, don't rule out the prospect of this reveal weakness mechanic. This is something you really want to play around with, see if it feels good. If it does feel good, then you can definitely spec into that, potentially just going for Penetrate and In for the Kill. And ignoring all of the defenses, picking up defenses for your character from somewhere else, and ignoring all of the elemental conversion shenanigans that are options for the Amazon, and electing just to deal straight up physical damage. One last thing I want to point out with Penetrate as a notable is if you have another look at the mods that can roll on spears, increased elemental damage with attacks is something that has a percentage number that can roll. This does not scale the stats that are inherent to the weapon. This is a stat that stacks linearly with other sources of it from across your character's passive tree, from across your character's other gear, and then this provides one overall multiplier to the amount of damage that you do. Because of this, a potentially quite good spear setup could be to have Devastating in conjunction with just the Amazon's mod here. So you're getting 500 or so to accuracy rating, and you're getting something like 92% increased elemental damage with attacks. Given that recombination is going to be available in 0.2.0 in limited form, this is probably going to be something that's reasonably acquirable, although we'll have to find that information out. And what this is going to end up meaning is that your spear's local damage, the amount that's actually printed on the weapon itself, that's going to be pretty small. But you're going to have a whole bunch of extra physical damage that's added here at this step from Penetrate, and then that's going to get converted into an element if you're using one of the skills that converts it into an element. And then at that point, Devastating ends up being a pretty good prefix that is going to further scale up your weapon damage as well. It may end up that it's better than having flat physical damage on your weapon, such as flaring, and it may end up that it's better than having percentage physical damage, such as tyrannical or merciless on your weapon, because it's going to have more synergies overall. That's something that's definitely going to feel a bit counterintuitive, but that's because this is something that scales up your character's stats, whereas the similar looking but different stats, such as tyrannical, these scale up the weapon's stats instead. So keep that in mind both when thinking of dream weapons that you might want to use on an Amazon, but also when you're thinking of realistically achievable alternatives. This Ascendancy has me hyped. It's one of the two that is at the top of my list to consider playing when 0.2.0 goes live in a few days' time. I'm going to leave it there though. May your Varlobs have interesting results.